Welcome to the Big Life Podcast, where dreams aren't just imagined, they're built brick by brick, belief by belief. Hosted by Neal Oates Jr. and Robin Lewis, this show is your invitation to discover your amazing capabilities, invest in your growth, and unleash your potential in ways you've only dreamed of. Join Neal and Robin as they dive deep into stories, insights, and tools designed to inspire you to show up big, live intentionally, and give yourself away for the betterment of those around you. Get ready to rise to what you're truly worthy of. The Big Life starts now.
Welcome to the Big Life Podcast. Neal Oates Jr. here. Robin Lewis, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Neal. Always happy to be here with you, my brother.
And I feel the same way. And today we're going to dive into, I don't know if it is something that is good, bad, challenging, if it is acceptable, but we're going to do this thing and we're going to have a discussion between two areas of leadership of life, philosophy, practice, and that's going to be challenge versus support. And first, when I say the word challenge, I know some people like, I'm not listening to this episode. I'm not going to listen to this show here, but challenge versus support. Before we go any further, before we go deeper and really dive into this, Robin, would you go ahead and just lay a groundwork, a framework for the challenge versus support question so our listeners will know exactly what we're going to be talking about?
Yes, sir. So we're talking about leadership. So we're talking leadership today, right? So in the Big Life acronym, the I is to invest, to improve yourself. And one of the areas that we need to improve ourselves in is as leaders. So we're talking leadership today. And leadership is the calibration of support and challenge to help those you lead to achieve their objectives or tasks, which will help the team or the organization to win. So leadership is the calibration of support and challenge. And so what is support and challenge? That's where we want to start with this today. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, Neal and I have gathered from a book, which I just want to give credit to. It's a book called The 100X Leader. Just going to hold it up here. The 100X Leader. For those of you who are watching this, you can see the book cover. It's How to Become Someone Worth Following by Jeremy Kubicek and Steve Cockrum. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today, so the ideas have come from that book. So support. First of all, what do we mean by support and challenge? Support means to equip and resource people for the journey ahead. To equip and resource people for the journey ahead. So we're supporting people in that way. And challenge, on the other hand, means to motivate people by holding them accountable to what they could do.
Hold on, Robin. When you say motivate by holding people, by holding them accountable, accountability is not motivating all the time to the wrong people or when done the wrong way, right? So I know we'll get into that, but I knew it was coming. And when you hit me with two words, motivation and then accountability. And those, many of us, we might have a negative attachment to that word accountability. But I know as we go through today, the listeners will say, okay, well, maybe I could start viewing that whole idea of accountability a little differently. So go ahead. I apologize. Go ahead.
It's so important to the discussion because the challenge is holding them to be accountable to what they can be, to the future that they could have if they have the resources. And so challenge is the push needed to get people to move to be the best that they can be, either as a team or as an individual. And as we talk about leadership and we talk about having the combination of support and challenge, and the point is for our listeners is that both are needed, is to liberate. And so I also want to give a sort of a framework or definition for what we mean by liberate. So we're trying to liberate others to their highest good. So to liberate, what we mean is to fight for the highest possible good of those you lead. To fight for the highest possible good of those you lead. And so whether you lead a business, a nonprofit, or a family, it is important to recognize that the best leaders in the world share expectations well while continuing to give the support that others need. So you're sharing the bar, you're setting the bar, you're sharing the vision, you're sharing the values and the standards, right? And you are providing the support needed to get there. So good leadership starts with your understanding of what your tendencies are. What do you tend towards more? Do you tend to provide more support, or do you tend to provide more challenge? And as leaders, we have to be honest with ourselves. And sometimes that, I know in my case, Neal, it took years for me to really start to recognize that that was my tendency. My tendency is to tend to provide more support. I tend to be more on the supportive side. I tend to shy back, if I could also say it this way, from challenging others, because my personality, just kind of, sometimes I see challenging as coming across as being discouraging, and I don't want to discourage people. I want to support them. And my wife and I have had much disagreement as we raised our daughter, Jillian. My wife, her tendency is to be more challenging. My tendency is to be more supportive. And over the years, and I sad to say, if I had to do it over again, I would welcome both. We actually got into arguments and disagreement about how we should approach things. And isn't it something that both are needed? I think about my mom. I remember when I look back at my family, Neal, my mom, her tendency was to be the challenging one. She challenged us. She had 4 boys, and she challenged us. She was the challenger. That was her tendency. She, as a mom, she provided support, but her tendency was clearly the challenge. And my dad, on the other hand, his tendency was to be supportive. And how ironic it is that in my household, I tend to be, my tendency is support, and my wife's tendency is challenge. But I remember as a young adult, Neal, when I look back at this, I have to laugh at myself, because as a young adult, I was living at home, in their home, thinking I was a big man, doing nothing, sitting at home watching TV. And I'm so glad and thankful for my mom challenging me in that regard, right? And I wasn't so thankful for it when it happened. And we had some high octave, high level discussions, and she had to challenge me, really, really challenge me. And I'm so glad that she did, because it caused me to take action, which helped me to become a better person.
So, Robin, it's funny that you mentioned you being the support to your wife being the challenger. In my house, it is the opposite. So I am all challenge and my wife is support, right? When I say I'm all challenge, you've probably even heard it in our conversation. I'm like, well, you know what? I think, never mind. I challenge you to, and it's even coming across in my vocabulary. I am one of those who, to a fault at many times, wants to bring the best out of people. I see the vision ahead. I see what's possible. And many times, to a fault, I admit, I will try to challenge them to success. I will want to bring things out of them. And often they don't want it as badly as I do for them at that moment. And so I've had to learn. And so you talking about the agreements or disagreements and the conversations that you all have had. I found myself in the very same boat. For instance, when, being in real estate, I love the profession. And so my wife was working for someone, and I'm like, babe, you don't have to work for anyone. You go get your real estate license and you would be great at this. You're a people person. And she was like, I'm not a people person. I'm a support person. I like being in the background. Yes, but as someone with their real estate license, you could do this. And she was like, I have no desire to get my real estate license. Hey, you should. And she said, listen, I've told you twice. Understood. And so I find myself on the opposite end. So you say, if you could go back, and when you look at things, there are times I look back and say, I could have, not only could I, but I should have been more supportive, not only in instances, but in different environments and different relationships where if I was aware of my tendency. So I find that my fault was a lot like now hindsight is 2020. But in the moment, I did not know that my tendency was to challenge, was to push, was to encourage, but unintentionally discourage when they didn't do or reach or achieve that goal that I set out there. And so now I'm looking back as we become more enlightened. We look back and say, oh, silly me. I'm just glad that God still watches out for babies and fools and I'm not young. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir. It's such a relevant subject, you know. And what I want to ask our listeners today is, what do you find more natural? Are you more supportive, or are you more like I am, or are you more challenging? The tendency, we have both in us. We do both. But what's your tendency? I think it's good for us to be honest with ourselves and to be aware of what our tendencies are, so that we can make adjustments. Because the truth is that both are needed. If my mom didn't challenge me, the chances are that I would end up not anywhere near living into my potential. That I would end up maybe expecting things to just happen for me and expecting things, having unrealistic expectations. That's the point. Both are needed. And so which one would those you lead, whether at home or whether at work, which one would they say that you tend to do more? We all tend to lean one way or the other. You know, I've been fortunate to have people around me at work who cared enough to say things like, and I remember, and Neal, this is where I said it took me a while to really even figure this out. A while of people saying things like this. Hey, Robin, they would call me aside and say, hey, Robin, you know, sometimes you have to be a little bit more tough. You know, you don't have to just take it all. You know, sometimes you're better off pushing people, not just taking what happens. I've had people that work with me, Neal, have to say statements like that. And it took more than once for me to realize. It took me years, actually. I really erred on this side as a husband, as a father, as a leader at work. I erred on the side of being afraid of confrontation. I saw it as confrontation, challenge. I saw it as confrontational, and I didn't like that. And so what happened was I shied away from it, not realizing that I was being detrimental, that I was not serving them by doing that. I thought I was doing well by encouraging and you know, whatever rationalization that I used. It took me a while to actually figure out that I was not doing well. And maybe my wife too. My wife got on my case a few times as well before I recognized that, you know, I need to make an adjustment here. I need to have the right amount of
Robert,
challenge.
on that, because going back to the definition of leadership that you use, you said it's the calibration, right? And now you said the right level. And so we know that no challenge is not the right level, right?
Correct.
So
Correct.
that's like with me, having the no support side is not the right level, because now I'm seen as a dictator. I'm seen as someone who just comes out and bludgeons his people, even with good intentions. You know, in what do they say? The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
And so me wanting to bring the best out eventually. And so my experience with those around me, with my circle, was different than yours in the fact that they were telling me the opposite. They were like, Neal, you don't have to be so tough. You don't have to always be going after it. You can give us a little bit of a break. Support your team. And in my head, I thought that my challenge was support, right? I thought that me spurring them on and wanting them to see and be more and achieve more was me being supportive. And I did not understand the difference. And I can think of two instances where I didn't understand the difference until it was too late, until the relationship and the environment had expired. And then I was like, I probably could have done, no, I definitely could have done things a lot different and had yielded a different result.
Yeah. And that's why it's such a good discussion for us to have with our team. If you have a team that you're leading, if you have leaders on that team, whatever your team looks like, it's good to understand the tendencies of each other. And it's good to acknowledge that both are needed because, yes, we kind of see things through our lens. So I thought I was challenging by being encouraging and supportive. And you thought you were supportive by challenging, right? And so we see things through our lens. And that's why it's good, folks. That's why we want you to be honest with yourself. And if you don't know, ask those around you, what is your tendency? Is it to
Hey,
be more
so
supportive or
when you ask, you just better be prepared for the answer because they have been waiting to tell you.
it might be surprised too, right? Yeah, and but so you I think that's a good point, Neal. If you're going to ask that question, don't become defensive. You want to at that point in time listen and consider and thank them. But it is a healthy conversation to have. I think we are liberating some of our listeners by sharing a topic like this because it's so important in the home, in the family, in the business or the nonprofit, whatever it is you lead. So, Neal, you talk about calibration. I have, like if I know some of our listeners might be driving now and they can't get a pen and paper. If you have a pen or paper, when you have the opportunity to have a pen and paper, what I would like you to do is draw a vertical line on that blank page. And then about halfway through that vertical line, you draw a horizontal line. And so what you'll have is 4 quadrants. And at the top of the vertical line, I want you to put high challenge. I'm sorry, high support. And then at the bottom of that vertical line, I want you to put low support, right? So you have 4 quadrants at the top, high support, at the bottom, low support. And then on the left side, low challenge. And on the right side, high challenge. And so what you're looking for is the combination of high support and high challenge. And so in the top right-hand corner, you have high support and high challenge, and that's where you liberate people. In the bottom right-hand corner quadrant, you're on the right side, so you have high challenge, but low support. And in that quadrant, you come across as more dominating, right? You're more dominating. And so that can create a culture of fear and manipulation, right? And then on the top left, if you have that will represent high support and low challenge, which a lot of times is where Robin was, what happens is that you become a protector. You're protecting people. And in doing so, you're creating a culture of entitlement and mistrust. And so high support and low challenge is not helping people to be liberated, right? And you're protecting them. And then on the bottom left-hand corner quadrant, the last one, which represents low support and low challenge, you're actually abdicating. And so there you're creating a culture of apathy and low expectation. So I think it's helpful if you can draw that quadrant and take a look at that. And then the goal is to provide high support and high challenge, and therefore liberate people. So that's what we mean by the calibration. And so if we have a tendency, it's okay. That's just how we're wired. You notice Neal and I, we're comfortable in sharing our tendencies. That's just how we're wired. But self-awareness now helps us to make adjustments because what we want is liberate. What we want is the best for those that we're leading, which creates the best for the organization or the family. And so with knowing our tendencies now, we need to make adjustments to make sure that we're doing the other. Make sense?
But Robin, as you do that, so when you look at that quadrant, that upper right quadrant, high support, high challenge, that requires a lot out of the leader, right? That requires us to shore up those areas of weakness or where we're not as strong. And then it requires us to be intentional, right? Because here's the challenge. See, once again, here's the hard part with being high support and high challenge is that the support and challenge for each individual, for each circumstance is not the same. Right.
Yeah.
So the way that I support Robin and challenge Robin is going to be differently than I support and challenge Joe.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so for us to effectively do that, and I think that's why what you said earlier was so important when you said, ask those that you lead. For instance, I could ask someone who has the same personality as me, right? Birds of a feather flock together. So I am in a group, a men's group, where all of us, well, most of us, except for one, there's one of us who is not the same. And he sticks out like green in a sea of red. So the three of us were doing a push-up challenge. And with all four of us were doing it. Three of us were, oh, let's do 100. Let's get to 150. Let's get to 400. Let's get to 500. And the fourth person was like, hold on, wait, we agreed to do 100, right? So now our challenge was seen as, so if I don't do 400 push-ups in a day, all of a sudden I am less than, I'm not one of the guys anymore, when all I agreed to do was the 100. And now you three, because you're challenging each other, have taken this, have quadrupled the expectation without their buy-in, right? And that's as simple as something just doing push-ups. So
Yeah.
now we have to look and see, well, what are the unintended consequences of me being heavy in one area? Or I thought that we were all on the same boat because we had all agreed to do one thing, right? And so the way that the majority of us were challenged and supported, like saying, go, go, go. They're like, that's not good enough support for our fourth member, right? That's not good enough for him. And so as simple as we make it sound, the goal is to get in this upper right-hand quadrant. The reality is that the actual achievement of getting there is going to require a lot more of us. And we're going to have to be intentional. We're going to have to reflect. We're going to have to know ourselves and know those around us.
Yes, it's so true. And that's, as a leader at my company, that's one of the areas that I had to grow. And I erred in many times. I really have. I really did. It starts with me getting better at sharing the expectations with others more clearly and consistently. For example, a lot of times I kind of put the big picture out there, but I need to be more specific about what the expectations are, right? So that's a general sense, but that's something that I needed to get better at. But then also, I needed to get better at having those difficult conversations when necessary. When it was necessary to challenge them when they fell short, and to help them to see the other side of themselves, right? So in other words, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And so if somebody doesn't come beside you, somebody who's outside of you, if they don't come beside you and let you know where you might need to make some change, then it does, a lot of times it won't happen. But doing that while still providing the support and the resources that are needed. I can't tell you the number of times I've had to come back to people and apologize. And it would sound something like this, Neal. Listen, John, I am so sorry that I allowed this action, whatever it was, to go on and on without me saying something to you. The reality is I messed up by not doing that. But here's what, and I had to start that way, apologizing, because I just kind of allowed it to happen without saying anything about it. When you don't do that, guess what? They're going to continue doing it. And so I'm not serving them. And it ended up, many times, it ended up in the relationship where the relationship went sour because of what I did. And it took enough of those for me to finally, boom, hit me on the head to say, Rob, that way doesn't work. Right? So that's one of the things I had to learn, because if I'm fighting for the best version of someone else on my team, then I need to have those tough conversations.
Robin, it's so hard to have tough conversations with people you care about, because this thing right here starts twisting our intentions. And then we start thinking about how they're going to perceive the conversation and everything, only to find out later that if we would have not ignored the problem and addressed it early on, they would have been more appreciative. They would be in a better place. They would have known really what the issue is, and they could have been working on fixing, correcting, improving. And so that's one of the tough things about working with people, about being a human being, about being a leader, is that we're going to need people, right? And in the needing of them, we want to make them better. And that comes with having those necessary conversations. And so really quickly, I know that I'm looking at the time, but I also want to ask, so how did you get to the point where you are having those conversations? You said because you had to grow into it, and then you started realizing that way ain't working. We've been trying that. And at first we always think that it's the other people or the organization or the quality of them. And then we have to look in the mirror if we're going to be honest leaders.
True.
And we say, it's not them, it's me. No one wants to, we don't want to admit that. It's not you, it's me. So how did you get to the point where you're saying, all right, we need to have this conversation? Did it ever become easy to have a hard conversation, a necessary conversation? I'm just curious because I know Robin today.
That's a good question. I don't think it has become easier. I still struggle with it. It's just my tendency. But with that being said, I do it more readily because I understand that I'm serving. And so one of the things that I am learning, I'm not the best at this. And anytime somebody shares around this, I'm tuning in to try and listen. So maybe you listeners might be like me, and you're going to tune into this. A key is doing it in a way that they know that I am for them. So a key, you have to challenge, but the key is doing it in a way that they know that you're doing it for them and that you are for them. And I think if we can communicate that, then it's a win. Because if people understand that, hey, he's sharing this, if I really stop and think about it, it's true, actually. And then I'm actually grateful that he shared that with me. It's like my mom, right? At the time, I didn't think it was, but when I look back at it now, I'm grateful that she took the time to do that. And so we want to do it in that way. And I'm working on this. I'm not the best at this. One thing I actually took from the book, that it's about learning the art of calling them up to who they are becoming instead of calling out their current behavior. So it would look something like, I see this in you, I see this is where you're going. And one of the things that I think you might need to change in order to get there is boom. So you're calling them up rather than just calling them out. It's very easy. And what happens a lot of times when you wait, so one thing that I would say that I think is key to our listeners who might relate to me is don't wait. That's one of the things that I'm learning, Neal. I'm still not the best at it. I'm being honest. I'm being transparent. Even with my relationship with my wife. Now, she might get embarrassed for me to say that. But in other words, there are times where I might need to challenge my wife. Come on, we're a team. We're in this together, right? And sometimes I hesitate to do that because, I don't want to be that person that's telling my wife, what to do or not to do. You know what I mean? I don't know if you relate to that, but the point is I'm still learning. And a key that I would share here is to don't wait. The quicker we can share those expectations or that challenge, the better. Sometimes when we wait, then it doesn't come across as lifting them up. It comes across more like you're calling them out.
So Robin, one thing I do, because you talked about this whole idea of they need to know that you're doing it in their best interest, right?
Yes.
That you're doing it to help them and to improve them. And because you see something in them that maybe they don't see or that they've lost vision or sight of. And so we know that both are necessary, but I believe that we both believe that starting with support is important, right?
Correct.
Because once you start with support, people will allow you to challenge them. Once you have that rapport, once they believe that Robin cares for me, Robin. So would you just walk us through why starting with support is so vitally important, even for someone like myself? And I'm going to say not even for, especially for someone like myself whose natural tendency is challenge, challenge, spur on the troops, let's go. But then I look back and my team hasn't moved, not because they don't necessarily believe me, but maybe it's because they don't know that I support them, that I care for them, that I believe in them, that I want to see them win. So could you just share why that, starting with that support piece, even though we know that both are necessary in that calibration, starting with support could be that missing key for many of our listeners who are like me?
Yes, sir. It's so true. It's a valid point. And that's what we're recommending, is to start with support. And so support allows you to establish trust in that relationship. And trust goes a long way. See, when we have that trust, then people will allow us to challenge them. Trust opens the door that allows us to challenge, because challenge will then be more easily accepted. That's the point. If we start with challenge, then we're probably going to get defense. We're going to get a closed door. But if we establish trust, and so there's three questions. You'll hear Neal and I talk about these questions a lot of times, on this podcast. That followers ask about their leaders. They might not verbally ask it, but they're asking themselves these three questions: is do you care about me? That's what a follower is asking. Do you care about me? Can I trust you? Can I trust you? And can you help me? And I think, we need to answer those three questions by what we do and how we approach that relationship. And so when we provide support, we can answer those questions. You've heard the old saying, people don't care what you know until they know how much you care. And for our listeners, Neal, I want to come back to something and highlight something you said earlier, which I think is very important as we are where we are right now. And that is, and I've erred on this side also, you can't assume, because let's say you're in an organization, you have people on your team, and you have people that started this year, you have people that started 5 years ago, right? The person that just started this year is not on the same level of trust as the person that you may have been around for the 5 years. And so you can't assume that because you're an established leader within the organization that you have established support with each individual. Neal said earlier that it's an individual thing. This is an individual thing when we're talking about support. And I think it's important to remember that, because you might be somebody who has provided support. You have a strong history of providing support within your organization, but now you have somebody new who has not received that. And you need to start from square one with that person. And then
otherwise, Robin, the first thing they're going to hear you doing is challenging them, and they're going to look around and say, who does this guy think he is? Who does this lady think she is to be challenging me? I don't trust them yet. And the others around me like, no, you can trust them. Be like, well, you can. You have a relationship. You have an experience with them. I don't have it yet. Right. And so that's why I think it is so important for us to start with that support piece and do it individually, case by case, instance by instance, individual, person to person, because if we start there and then we start building on that trust. So really quickly, I know that you mentioned this whole idea of coming in and earning trust, building the relationship. What about those individuals who may be listening and who are saying, I don't need them to trust me. I am in a position, my title requires them to listen to me. My title makes me their leader, quote unquote. What would you say to them as we go through this support challenge, the necessary or the need to start with support? Because they're saying, I don't need to start with support. I came in, my position, my title gives me the validity that I need.
Yes, I think, we can do a whole other subject on that, because it's a really good consideration. There are different levels of leadership, and positional leadership is actually on the bottom of the ladder. People follow you because they have to. But what we're suggesting here, the liberating leader, becomes where the difference is that people follow you because they want to. And so when people want to follow you, they're going to give you more. They're going to do more. They're going to help you and the organization a whole lot more than if you're doing it just based upon your position. They're just going to give you the minimum, and then they're out of there, right? That's it. That's where you're going to find the 9 to 5. They're counting down the clock. It's 10 minutes to 5. I'm out of here. Let's start packing up.
Already packing up, huh, Robin? Gone. You see the back of their head when the clock hit 5.
Yeah. And we can talk about the different stages. The second level up is about relationship, which is what we're talking about here, where people follow you because they like you. People follow you because they want to follow you, where you've established relationship, and they become more open. The higher you go up on that level of influence, that level of leadership, is the more influence that people give you, right? So for today's show, we want to talk about now that you have that relationship established, that you want to challenge them. If you truly care about those that you lead, then it is vital for you to bring honesty with respect, to speak the truth in love, in order for them to become the best that they can be. And so as a leader, your job is to not shirk your responsibility to liberate them. And I want to kind of wind this down by saying again what to liberate means. So as a leader, your and my job is to liberate others. And what we mean by liberate is to fight for the highest possible good of those you lead. And so that's what we're encouraging you to do, folks. Have that calibration of support and challenge, and fight for the highest good of those that you lead.
It's not easy, Robin, but it is necessary. And in fact, it's so necessary that you and we continue to do this thing on a daily basis, working to calibrate our leadership, working to figure out where we might have come up short yesterday, today, so that tomorrow can be better. So this has always, as always, has been absolutely insightful, been enjoyable. So here's what I would love to know from our audience. We would love to know not only what your tendencies are, as Robin has asked you in the past. I would like to know who in your life do you need to go in and maybe ask or get that assessment from. Maybe it's going to be your significant other, your spouse. It might even be your kids, ladies and gentlemen, because we don't think that they know, but they know. Do you need to ask some of your colleagues or peers? Do you need to ask your leaders? Because your leaders might be challenging you and they say you need to be more supportive. Right. So my friendship with Robin requires me to be more supportive. My friendship with Robin requires him to be more challenging. Right. And so that's the beauty of this thing, because yes, while we are alike in our love for growth and development, we are also very different in our tendencies on support and challenge. So much so that it has shown up when we have our conversations, Robin and I, off camera. I'm asking, well, what's going on with your team? And he's asking, well, what's going on with yours? And we have those discussions. And then I say, have you considered doing this? He was like, no. Neal, have you considered supporting your team in this way? No, I have not. I'm glad that you're here. And so while we're having these conversations and sharing this stuff on the podcast, just know that it's our duty, our responsibility to make sure that we are living this out. So as you all listen to these episodes, to these shows, just know that oftentimes these ideas come about because Robin and I are working through these issues, working through some of these things ourselves. So Robin, before we go, as we talk about support versus challenge and liberating, anything that you want to leave with the listeners, sir?
I hope that we have encouraged you to have these types of discussions, for you to think about it, but not only think about it, but have this type of discussion with those that you lead, with your family, your spouses, your significant other, your company, your nonprofit, whatever it might be. I would just encourage you to have a discussion around this. Find out what your tendencies are if you don't already know. Find out what the tendencies are of those that are around you, and have a discussion around it to help each other achieve bringing both together.
Good stuff. And as you've heard both Robin and I mention, it is not going to be easy, but it is going to be worth it having those discussions, finding out what those tendencies are. It will make a world of difference in your life, in 360 degrees of your life and everything that you do. So Robin and I, we want to thank you all for hanging out with us for another episode of The Big Life. We know that we are better for this conversation. We hope, pray, and believe that you are better for it as well. We want to encourage you to be sure to share this podcast, share this show with someone that you care about, someone that you want to liberate through your leadership, maybe expose them to a different voice or different voices where they can hear and maybe receive the permission to be liberated. And make sure that you comment, that you subscribe, because we need the love, the support, and the appreciation. It is always encouraging when we see a new subscriber or we receive some feedback that might help us on this journey towards big life. So we want to remind you that we love you, God loves you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And until the next time we see you or you see us, we're right there with you. Bye.